You're listening to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan.
Welcome to Women's Media Center Live. I'm Robin Morgan, and I have the mother of all codes in my nose, so I can barely say my N's like in Nancy, and my M's like in Morgan, like I'm Robin Morgan. Like as if I was Borgan. Well, this is not COVID. This is just a cold in the nose, but I'm telling you that so that you won't think I'm the ghost of a manatee or a salamander talking to you. I feel quite all right, rather cheerful, in fact, but I do sound, well, dramatic. So try to ignore that as we go through the program, because today we are going to revisit our special periodic sub-series on Native or Indigenous women, based obviously in North America with Native women, but inclusive of the whole world, that is, Indigenous women. They don't see borders, so why should we? Since this program does this kind of thing year-round, we do not observe the touchingly patronizing practice of bestowing International Women's Day and Women's History Month and Black History Month and Latinx Month, etc., and so forth, all the while they reserve their basic 12 months for straight white males. No, we try to observe the consciousness 365 days a year. So it just happens to be a timely coincidence that we will post and air this show in this particular month, Indigenous Peoples Month. More on that later, though, on both the show and on the month. My special guest for today's program is Victoria Tauli-Corpuz, who is herself an Indigenous Activist Leader from the Kankana-ey peoples of the Philippines, and who has served as United Nations Special Rapporteur for the implementation of international standards concerning the rights of Indigenous activists, which basically needs to be pretty much all rights, basic rights. She is one fantastic woman. But before we get to Vicky, we're going to need some background on indigeneity. Did you know that word? It's really cool. Indigeneity issues. And that means we need to go inside the headlines. There are an estimated 476 million Indigenous peoples spread across 70 countries worldwide. There is simply not enough space to map the tortuous route of finding a day to honor Indigenous peoples, for the U.S. government to honor them, or for the United Nations to recognize their rights in a declaration. Suffice it to say that the UN endeavor began around 1914, already as an old idea then, and was finally passed by the United Nations in 2007. The United States, however, has still not got its act together. Individual states observe the day, usually October 12th, but that's tricky because it's also Columbus Day, and Italian Americans get cranky at the notion of losing their day. Each year, another state stumbles in, one by one. In 1990, South Dakota was the first state to replace Columbus Day with Native Americans Day as an official state holiday. In 1992, Berkeley, California became the first city to officially observe Indigenous Peoples Day, which coincided with the 500th anniversary of Columbus's arrival in the Americas. Hawaii cleverly changed the name to Discoverers Day in honor of the Polynesian navigators who originally peopled the islands. A growing list of state and local governments acknowledge it in some form or other. I won't list them all here, but you can find them easily enough online. Now, while Indigenous Peoples Day remains a non-federal holiday, it is federally recognized as a national holiday. And if you can work that one out, I salute you. Indigenous peoples in Canada comprise the First Nations, the Inuit, and the Métis. Such descriptors as Indian and Eskimo have fallen into disuse in both Canada and the U.S. These and the term Aboriginal are being replaced with Indigenous. The Inuit have achieved a degree of administrative autonomy with the 1999 creation of the territories of Nunavik in northern Quebec, Nunatsiavut in northern Labrador, and Nunavut, which was formerly part of the Northwest Territories. In the United States, populations of Native Americans, Inuit, and other indigenous designations totaled 2,786,652, constituting about 1.5% of 2003 census figures. Some 563 scheduled nations, or tribes, are recognized at the federal level, and a number of others are recognized at the state level. Globally, though, the population is enormous. In most parts of Oceania, indigenous peoples outnumber the descendants of colonists. Exceptions include Australia, New Zealand, and Hawaii. In New Zealand, the Maori population estimate in 2021 was 17% of the population. In some countries, particularly Latin America, indigenous peoples form a sizable component of the overall national population. In Bolivia, they account for an estimated 56 to 70% of the total nation, and at least half of the population in Guatemala and the Andean and Amazonian nations of Peru. Indigenous peoples make up 0.4% of all Brazilian population. That's about 700,000 people, and are found in the entire territory of Brazil, across it, although the majority do live in reservations in the north and center western part of the country. In 2007, the National Indian Foundation, FUNAI, confirmed the presence of 67 different uncontacted peoples in Brazil, up from 40 in 2005. With this addition, Brazil has now overtaken the island of New Guinea as the country having the largest number of uncontacted peoples. But Asia contains the majority of the world's present-day indigenous populations, about 70%, according to the International Workgroup for Indigenous Affairs. In the Philippines, there are 135 ethno-linguistic groups, the majority of which are considered as indigenous peoples by mainstream indigenous ethnic groups in the country. The indigenous people of Cordillera Administrative Region and Cagayan Valley in the Philippines are the Igorot people. The indigenous peoples of Mindanao are the Lumad peoples and the Moro, who also live in the Sulu archipelago. The Philippines has one of the largest indigenous populations on the planet. Not that this is always dealt with intelligently. The Vietnamese, for example, viewed and treated the indigenous montagnards from the central highlands of Vietnam as savages, which caused a montagnard uprising against the Vietnamese. The Bangladesh government has chosen to ostrich the situation, shrugging that there just are no indigenous peoples in Bangladesh, which has, not surprisingly, angered the indigenous peoples of Chittagong Hill Tracts, Bangladesh, collectively known as the Juma. The Hmong people of China and the Karen, Burman, and Arakan of Myanmar have staged revolts against the government at times, and so forth, ad nauseum. Humanity will always find some group as a target for bigotry, it would seem. Although the indigenous make up just 6% of the global population, they account for about 19% of the extreme poor. Indigenous people's life expectancy is up to 20 years lower than the life expectancy of non-indigenous people worldwide. We might lay a fair amount of responsibility, if not outright blame, for the colonialism and the exploitation suffered for centuries by indigenous peoples On the doctrine of discovery. You know about the doctrine of discovery? Well, it emerged in the 15th century, a concept of public international law promulgated by the papacy, good old Rome, and by Christian European monarchies in order to legitimize the colonization and evangelization of lands outside Europe. Between the 15th century, mid-15th, and the mid-20th century, this idea allowed European entities to seize lands inhabited by indigenous peoples under the guise of discovering new land, meaning land not inhabited by Christians. Terra Nullius, meaning that land was empty or void, was a justification for European groups to claim that land for their country, despite the many indigenous groups who were already present and living on it. This same justification was later, by the way, promulgated about Israel, a land without a people for a people without a land, although there were, of course, Palestinians living on that land. A series of papal bulls cemented the concept that allowed outright confiscation of the, quote, property and sovereign rights of heathens, close quote, or at minimum that conquest could legally occur if non-Christians refused to comply with Christianization. Translation: peoples considered not civilized by European standards of societal normality, suppression of women, economics, private property, leadership, monarchy, and general culture, ownership of natural resources, was let loose on the world for the age of exploration. So, Portugal was granted permission by the papacy to expand in Africa. Spain was urged to move westward across the Atlantic to convert and conquer indigenous peoples in the New World, and the beginnings of European colonialism were effectively formalized into international law, protecting any land that had been discovered or previously possessed by any Christian owner. The Spanish requirement of 1513 further emphasized that it was a divinely ordained right to take possession of the territories of the New World and to subjugate, exploit, and, when necessary, fight the native inhabitants, or they would be annihilated. The document was supposed to be read to indigenous peoples so that they theoretically could accept or reject the proposal, because refusal meant war could justifiably be waged against them. Many conquistadores apparently feared that if given the option, indigenous peoples would simply accept Christianity, which would legally not permit invasion of their lands or the theft of their belongings. So this commonly resulted in Spanish invaders reading the document aloud to the night sky or to the trees, with no one else present. Being Catholic countries in 1493, England as well as France worked to reinterpret the doctrine of discovery to serve their own colonial interests, and the new theory argued that Henry VIII of England would not violate the 1493 papal bulls, which divided the world for the Spanish and Portuguese and effectively set a precedent among European colonial nations that the first Christian nation to occupy land was the, quote, legal owner and had to be respected by international law, close quote. This rationale was first used in what was to become the American colonies. James I stated in the Virginia Charter that colonists could be given property rights because the lands were not now actually possessed by any Christian prince or people. It was considered the duty of English monarchs to spread Christianity, quote, to those who as yet live in darkness and miserable ignorance of the true knowledge and worship of God, and to bring the infidels and savages living in those parts to human civility and to a settled and quiet government. Period, close quote. This bold, blatant, openly admitted approach to colonization of indigenous lands resulted in a huge acceleration of exploration and of land claiming, particularly by France, England, and Holland. In 1792, U.S. Secretary of State Thomas Jefferson claimed that this European doctrine of discovery was international law applicable to the new U.S. government as well. The doctrine and its legacy continue to influence American imperialism and the treatment of indigenous peoples who have suffered the results. Yet they are the ones who know, the indigenous. This isn't New Age sentimentality or romanticism to say that. While indigenous peoples own, occupy, or use a quarter of the world's surface area, they safeguard 80% of the world's remaining biodiversity, and they have a special relationship to and use of their traditional land. That ancestral land has a fundamental importance for their collective physical and cultural survival as peoples. Indigenous populations hold their own diverse concepts of development based on their own values, visions, needs, and priorities. They hold vital ancestral knowledge and expertise on how to adapt, mitigate, and reduce climate and disaster risks. Most of their process and their substance is women's leadership. We have to take a first break here, but don't go away because I'll be right back with the conversation, and that means with Victoria Tauli-Corpuz.
Subscribe to this program on your favorite podcast platform and leave us a review. Follow us on Twitter at WMC Live, like our Facebook page at facebook.com/WMC Live, and visit us at WMCLive.com for more information about our show and our guests.
You're listening to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan.
Victoria Tauli-Corpuz is a development consultant and an international indigenous activist of Kankana-ey Igorot ethnicity. In 2014, she assumed responsibilities as the third United Nations Special Rapporteur on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. She is the Indigenous and Gender Advisor to the Third World Network, a member of the UN Development Program Civil Society Organizations Advisory Committee, and a member of the World Future Council. She was the first recipient of the Gabriela Silang Award, conferred in 2009 by the National Commission on Indigenous Peoples. She has served as chairperson of the UN Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues and was the rapporteur for the Voluntary Fund for Indigenous Populations. She was educated in the Philippines and completed her nursing degree at the University of the Philippines, Manila. As an activist, she helped organize indigenous peoples on the community level to fight against the projects of then-President Ferdinand Marcos, including organizing indigenous people to stop the Chico River hydroelectric dam project, which would have inundated traditional villages, and the logging operations of Cellophil Resources Corporation on ancestral lands. She's also a dear friend of many years, and it was she who was my guide, my mentor, and my friend in the late 1980s when I spent time in the Philippines with indigenous women in the Cordilleras for the Sisterhood is Global Institute. Flash forward to today. In April of this year, Philippines President Rodrigo Duterte, who is a dictator, had her put on a list of suspected terrorists. She spent months hopping from one city to another in the West. And she says that she thinks that this is retaliation for criticism of the military by her, that Duarte found very unpleasant, because she was criticizing the military because they were creating forced displacement of indigenous people in Mindanao in the south. And I've managed to track her down and find her after all these years. It's a joy to reconnect. Vicky, at last, Victoria Tauli-Corpuz. I can't believe I finally tracked you down and reached you. I'm so delighted. Welcome, my dear. Welcome to Women's Media Center Live.
Well, thank you for tracking me down and finding me. I've also been thinking about you a lot, and thanks to the Women's Media Circle for your efforts to track me down.
Well,
it's indeed a pleasure to have this talk with you.
Well, we've been working with Rebecca Adamson, wonderful Rebecca Adamson, and we're working on Indigenous women, both in the United States, Native women, and now internationally. And the first person I thought of course, was you, because of the connections with the Igorot people, and because of our memorable trip in 1988, God, back when dinosaurs roamed the earth, into the Cordilleras, the northern area of the Philippines, to meet with indigenous peoples. You remember that trip? You were the guide and the mother of us all.
Yes.
Oh, God.
Yes, I remember very clearly the trip. We hiked down the mountains to go to Butuagan in Sadanga.
Yes.
And we met with the women who were the indigenous women who were the ones in the front line of the protest against the Chico River Dam project, which was a project of the Marcos dictatorship. And this dam will potentially erode, drown their communities and the rice fields. So it was such a great pleasure to bring you there, for you to be able to see the area, their territory, as well as to talk with them. And that was really very memorable.
It was a great honor for me. It was terrifying because of I'm not particularly athletic, and the rope bridge over that deep gorge was, let me put it this way, was memorable. But it was worth it.
Yeah, in fact, I remember what you said. When we were climbing back up, and you said you have been to Palestine, you have been facing guns, but climbing the mountain is even more difficult.
Well, I didn't remember that, but I stand by it. Yeah, it was pretty fantastic. Wow. But we did, and that was memorable. The women were fantastic. Wasn't there a thing with the Chico? Fortunately, I put this in a book so I could remember it now. A thing about in the 1960s with, as you just said, the Chico Dam project, where the surveyors would come in, like they often came in, the loggers too, and the surveyors would come in and they would put out all their little surveying sticks. And then in the morning, and they'd go away. And then in the afternoon, tell me if I'm misremembering now. In the afternoon, the women would remove all the surveying sticks, and burn them. But they did that. Yeah. They did that naked. They did that without clothing on, because it was considered a tremendous taboo. Neither the native men nor the loggers, nor the surveyors, dared stop the women, dared touch the women, because all hell would break loose. It was taboo. And they were also trying to stop their men from violent means. And so this was their peaceable way, and they kept doing it until the World Bank itself declined and said, okay, we give up. We're not doing this anymore. And there's a plaque, isn't there? Isn't there some sort of memorial
Yeah,
plaque.
there was a plaque. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. A memorial plaque memorializing the struggle that these peoples along the dam have fought.
And there still is no dam.
No, there's no dam. No,
Oh, how
it stopped
wonderful.
because yes. Well, what happened was, of course, there were a lot of violations. Not several of the leaders were in jail. Makliing Dulag, who was the leader of the Butbut people, was assassinated along with his assistant Pedro Dungok. The military came to their houses and killed them in their houses. No, so the struggle has really assumed a very global scale. No, because we of course reach out to the churches and the United Nations, and also made it a very big issue internationally. And then, of course, the World Bank at that time was also, maybe they were quite worried because there was a lot of militarization happening. Communities were being bombed, no, and so there was a huge campaign against this, which in the end led to the bank canceling the whole project. But of course, in 1986, there was this the downfall of the Marcos dictatorship.
Right.
So after a few years, the one who replaced him, Cory Aquino, pushed for the cancellation of the project, and the World Bank canceled the whole project, and they didn't release the loan.
Isn't that amazing? And you were the real organizer of that, Vicky. I mean, I know you'll say, we were many people and I was only one of a few, but you were the real organizer of that resistance. I mean, it was incredible. And it was...
Well, I was part of it.
Yeah.
Because at that time we were involved in helping, in reaching out to the communities.
You
and
were...
of course, bringing out the news, about it.
Yeah, but you were the organizer of the Women's Center in, was it in Baguio? In Sagada?
The Cordillera Women's.
Yeah, the
Cordillera Women's Center. Right.
And I remember also that there was an amazing woman, because I remember bringing in the menstrual extraction kits and smuggling them in through customs. But there was a wonderful physician, Geraldine
Geraldine Cayambas.
Yeah,
the doctor. She's a medical doctor.
She was incredible. Her patients she only had 250,000 patients. If you counted the New People's Army, people who were fugitives in the hills against Marcos, and the villagers. I mean, and when I said, how many patients do you have, and she said 250,000, I thought, well, okay, wait a minute, something is off here. But no, she was, and I said, what do you need? And she said she was so tired. She said, everything from Q-tips to aspirin. I need anything.
Exactly.
So you and her.
She passed away,
Yeah.
She had breast cancer.
And
she passed away.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
Yes.
She was a great lady.
Yeah.
A great lady.
Oh yeah.
But you were all
so.
of you who were organizing in the North. You've been on the case of Indigenous before it became, how shall we say, chic. Before it became an international issue. And you've been steadily on it for just years and years and years. How did the well, first of all, tell what is a UN Special Rapporteur, and then talk about the time when you were the rapporteur for Indigenous issues.
Okay. Well, a UN Special Rapporteur is a person who is he is appointed by the UN General Assembly to look into the situation of specific groups of people. So we have a UN Special Rapporteur on the against the domestic violence, violence against women, and we have a special rapporteur on the rights of indigenous peoples. So our role is to look into the situation of the specific theme, that was assigned to us. In my case, indigenous peoples. We do country visits. Upon the invitation of governments, we go to the countries and document, talk to the indigenous peoples, and make a full report of what we have seen as far as the situation of rights of indigenous peoples are concerned, no? And then we present this report before the Human Rights Council of the UN as well as the General Assembly. So the reports that we make are either country reports or thematic reports. And I also did a report on indigenous women, no, which is a unique report because the rapporteurs before me were men, no? So they never did a report on women. So when I became the rapporteur, I decided that the thematic issue that I will deal with first will be on indigenous women. So that's what we do. We make those reports and then we follow up with the governments. And when there are cases that were brought to our attention, we write letters. I write a letter to the government concerned and ask them to look into the situation and write back to me on what they have done about this. No.
Yeah.
So that's what rapporteurs do.
So it is you're in effect you're the voice of a particular people or on a particular issue. You are the voice to the United Nations. Well, thank goodness that you were that. Wow. For how long were you the special rapporteur on indigenous women issues?
It's for 6 years. 6 years from 2014 to 2020.
Wow. Well, they were very lucky to get you, and they should have you again and again and again and again and again because it's amazing. I can't think of no one better. And during that time, maybe you're the one who's responsible for the fact that the issue of indigenous peoples and indigenous women, I must say in particular, has become such a global one because they're climate defenders. They are, but they're in very vulnerable positions because they have been murdered in the Amazon. They're just killing women. In so many parts of the world, they are considered. I mean, it's not even oppression; it's erasure. And to speak out in the face of that is quite something. And then I wanted to ask you this. Then there is this other evil lurking in the bushes, which is co-optation.
Yes.
I mean, suddenly in parts of the United States, which is its own mess these days, but in parts of the United States, indigenous has become, well, let me put it this way. There are indigenous chic restaurants. There is indigenous fashion designers. And you look at this and you think, wait a minute. People are still starving. They are still working rice paddies. They are still being killed for defending the environment. What are we doing here? But suddenly it's very chic. What do we do about that? And how do we differentiate between not being co-opted, or when is it co-optation and when is it winning? Because we want to we want to win, but
well, it's true, the states as well as the big corporations, of course, are doing their best to co-opt or to divide indigenous peoples among themselves, no? And so, what we usually do is to really engage with the indigenous peoples on the ground and to make sure that the issues that they are fighting for are really the ones that are brought into the attention of the authorities, no?
Yes.
For instance, one of the things that I discovered in as a rapporteur was, I went to do a country visit to Australia. And it's so shocking for me to learn that there's only 5% of the population of Aborigines in Australia. Yeah. But the majority of people in prison are 50%. The 50% of the Aborigines are the ones in prison, no?
Yeah,
so,
of course.
So there's a very high level of incarceration happening, for indigenous people simply because they are discriminated against. Racism still continues to prevail.
Absolutely.
No? And the police authorities, they just any simple issue, they will arrest these people. In fact, I went to visit the the women's jails, no, the women's prisons, and majority of the women who are there are the Aboriginal women.
Sure.
And I said, why are you here? What was the crime that you committed? She said, I didn't pay the fine for parking in the wrong place. And they stay in jail forever. And that's the same case in the United States.
Yeah.
There is a very disproportionately high number of indigenous peoples, and also, of course, including women who are in jail. In New Zealand, our friend Marilyn Waring was with us in our visit to the Chico Dam, isn't it? But in New Zealand, the majority of the ones in jail are Maori, but the majority are women. The women is the Maori women and not the men.
Yeah.
So this is the picture that we see.
Well, the crime is simply being indigenous. The crime is being indigenous. That's
Exactly. It's just being indigenous, and that's a crime in itself, So I think that's really what needs to be done to really fight against this pervading racism and discrimination against indigenous people, which is systemic, built in the structures. And that's why I'm glad that you are in media, because the media will indeed have a very important role to play in terms of exposing these kinds of very dire realities of indigenous peoples, not just in the South, but also in the rich countries like the United States.
Yeah, because it's such an incredible dispiriting process. And first they just laugh at you and dismiss you, and then they pay attention, but it's a little bit more serious, and then they put you in jail, and then they finally try to kill you after they've tried to kill you, and then if nothing else works, they try to co-opt you. So it's a whole one thing gives way to another, and if you are still at all standing or even kneeling by the end of that, you might just have an inch of power, but it will be an inch of power, and you keep at it, you keep at it, you keep at it. How do you keep at it all these years? Wonderful, Vicky. How do you look at how you've kept at it? My God, from being the coordinator of the Women's Center in the Cordilleras, and from having a constituency that was 250,000 people, to being a UN rapporteur, and the awards that you've been given, and the major voice that you are in the indigenous community. How do you keep at it? It's an interesting question.
When we were facing these problems related to our territories, that's when we went to the UN to push for an instrument that will protect indigenous people's rights. So this is the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples.
Yes.
And I was there from day one until it got adopted in 2007. It took 25 years for us to get the UN to adapt it, but in the process of doing that, I've met with a lot of indigenous leaders and activists, many indigenous women who have been participating, and as a rapporteur, I've been going to the villages of many of the indigenous peoples. I've been to the Amazon, to the Democratic Republic of Congo,
Yes.
of course here in Asia, as well as in a lot of countries in Latin America. So. And I saw for myself that in communities where they are strong, they are able to set up their own autonomous governments and self-rule, and rule themselves. That's where the situation is much more better, because they are able to define the kind of development that happens in their territories. They also run their schools. And they are able to, of course, continue protecting their forests and their whole ecosystem. So that for me is the inspiration. That's why the work we do is basically to really help in empowering people at the local level, because I strongly believe that if they are strengthened and they have internalized the rights and to continue and assert this, then there will be many communities which will be like that, which are conserving the systems, the ecosystems that the world badly needs,
Yes.
then there is hope. Then there
That's
is
right.
hope that
That's
maybe things are going to change. And I've seen this, for instance, in Mexico. There is a group of people called the Puripecha in Michoacan, and they were beset by the drug lords and the corrupt officials, and they decided, the women, in fact, were the ones who led the protest. The women decided that they don't like anymore to live in that kind of situation because their children were also being recruited as mules, to carry
Sure.
drug mules. So they decided to protest, and the forests were being cut. So they set up barricades, and they stopped the trucks from coming out of the forest, and then they drove away the officials in the municipality and said, we will elect our own officials. So they elected their own officials, and then the Mexican government filed a case against them, saying that it was illegal. And then they said, no, it's legal. The Constitution of Mexico respects the rights of indigenous peoples to govern themselves. And
Yes.
they won in the Supreme Court. So now I asked the Mexican government, I said, I talked to these people, and they swear that their well-being, their security is in a much better situation now because of the autonomy, the assertion of ruling themselves.
Sure.
And I asked the government, is it true? Do the indicators show that? And they said, yes, it's true. They are healthier. There is less violence. There are no more drug cartels going there.
Right.
So I think that's the kind of thing that keeps me going.
Well,
when you see these kinds of changes.
Well, of course, and I think of two things. One I think is personal, which is that I've always said for myself, when I am in despair over, I don't know, big city feminism or something where people begin to jostle each other for positions, or the way anything can be co-opted or corrupted, I go to the field. I go to the field, and if once I'm in the ground, on the ground with the women doing the work, then it all becomes crystal clear, and I know what my part is, and it is to support that. But that's one thing. The other is that it isn't, it's very selfish actually, because the values of indigenous peoples are the values that could save the planet. Seriously,
exactly.
there is a real, not a sentimental, but a very practical reverence for natural resources because they keep people alive. There is a different pace and a different speed and a different quality to the resistance. For, everything that you've spoken of today, and that I remember about the Igorot people and the Ifugao and the Kalinga from the Philippines, and everything I remember was always, and maybe this is just because it was women, but then all the more so, it was peaceable. Nothing was violent. I remember the rice paddies where they spelled out the words on the rice paddies, revolution and love. That's not the kind of thing that you forget very easily.
Exactly.
And so the values themselves are transformative. And if those values could be contagious to the rest of us, that would be a different world,
Exactly.
Oh, my dear, I am so grateful to have reconnected with you. I can't begin to tell you. Thank you. Thank you for everything you've done in the 35 years since we last connected. I hope it won't be another 35 because I won't be alive.
No. When I go to New York, I'll link up with you. Then we can see each other.
Yes,
so that
absolutely.
At least we can see each other again.
Absolutely. That was a memorable trip for 6 weeks in the Philippines. But thank you. I'm so deeply grateful to you and everyone who connected us so that we actually could do this conversation.
Thank you very much.
It's time for another break, but I will interrupt for just a moment to say that when I finally was able to reach Vicky, I tried all over the world. I tracked her down in Bangkok, actually, where she was for a few weeks to do a special training of other organizers. So you learn it, you do it, you pass it on. She is one amazing, wonderful woman. Well, I will return directly with some, you betcha, fighting words.
The Women's Media Center, founded in 2005 by Jane Fonda, Gloria Steinem, and myself, is a progressive, nonpartisan, nonprofit organization working to make women visible and powerful in media. You can learn more about the WMC at womensmediacenter.com.
You're listening to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan.
Indigenous, native, belonging to a place. Those are fighting words. How cynically and swiftly our modern culture sucks life from the living. How vampirically. Within hours, or so it feels, this culture attempts to use, exploit, commercialize indigenous, well, anything except indigenous truths. A recent issue of The New Yorker featured a piece on how the modern indigenous kitchen became the best new restaurant in the United States, highlighting its menu, every dish made without wheat flour, dairy, cane sugar, black pepper, or any other ingredient introduced to the continent after Europeans arrived. Now that's the brainchild of Sean Sherman, a 48-year-old Oglala Lakota chef, and nearly overnight it became the most prominent example of indigenous American cuisine in the United States. In June, the James Beard Foundation named Owamni the best new restaurant in the country. It's in Minneapolis, it's gourmet, and it's very expensive, as is Wapepa's Kitchen in Oakland, California, as are others, as are the websites beginning to advertise indigenous fashion, indigenous jewelry. This even trickles down to the decidedly uncommercial world of poetry, with a monthly journal once titled Poetry Chicago, now simply called Poetry, a venerable publication founded in 1912, coming on board excitedly to field an entire issue devoted to indigenous poets, which is deserved. How can we begrudge this to a people silenced and strangled for so long? And why should we? How, in fact, do you tell the difference between being co-opted and winning? How do you know when you've sold out or when you've bought in? Well, I believe if anyone knows how to navigate that particular slippery terrain, it would be indigenous women. Terra, Nullius, meaning empty, void land. Now, that's what they called it in Latin. That's how the papal powers and the monarchs of Europe, in all their resplendent, glowing Christianity, described the New World, a pure, undiseased, unlike Europe, unpolluted, empty land, rich with abundant fish, fowl, game, lumber, fruits, vegetables, and everything else. Yet today the indigenous rise from it as if from seeds they themselves once gathered and sowed, as if they were flowers opening their buds to the sun, as if they were crops ripening to feed their own children. I believe they are still too close to these roots to be lost, because today they are the land defenders, like the natives at Standing Rock, the historic gathering of tribes in solidarity to halt the Dakota Access Pipeline that would spill oil across the land. They are the water defenders of El Salvador, who rallied to prevent a global mining corporation from poisoning the country's main water source. They are the Aymara women, the Cholitas, who climbed the highest peaks in Bolivia in their native dress at 4 degrees Fahrenheit temperatures to boot, to show their support for women's reproductive rights. They are the champions of biodiversity, the ones who confront the killers of entire species, the ones staving off environmental collapse. In the past 10 years, an environmental activist somewhere in the world was killed every 2 days. In 2021, 3/4 of such murders were committed in Central America, mainly by organized criminal groups and governments that want to destroy land for profit through mining, logging, and extractive industries like oil and gas. A recent report from the international NGO Global Witness published these statistics and more. Last year, of the 200 environmental defenders killed, 54 were in Mexico. About 40% of the murdered were indigenous, although indigenous people make up less than 5% of the world's entire population. In Brazil, since tracking the deaths of land defenders began in 2012, 343 people have been killed, with 83% of them dying in the Amazon. These activists are the crucial first line of defense against ecological collapse. Yet these murders occur in silence. Besides Brazil and Mexico, the deadliest countries for environmental activists were Colombia, Honduras, and the Philippines. Widespread underreporting, Global Witness says, means that in Mexico alone, the group found that 94% of such murders go unreported, and less than 1% of cases are ever resolved. Look, we are nowhere even near demands based on actual justice yet. Far from, for instance, demands for sovereignty of indigenous territories in North America or the Philippines. How naive that sounds when you pose it against the background of global climate change moving at faster rates than anticipated, soon to reach the point of absolutely no return. This is a fight for survival, a fight with which the indigenous are tragically familiar, but a fight they are uniquely equipped to lead, if we would only follow. Those are my fighting words. Add yours on Twitter, and remember to tag us at WMC Live, and use the hashtag #FightingWords.
And that's our show for this week. You can follow me on Twitter, Facebook, and now Instagram at @TheRobinMorgan, and you can check out my blog at robinmorgan.net and find my latest book of poems, Dark Matter, and my brand new novel, Parallax, wherever books are sold. Opinions expressed on this program do not necessarily represent the Women's Media Center. Here's the family for Women's Media Center Live. Executive producer as well as founding and sustaining sponsor, Regina K. Scully. WMC president and co-executive producer of this program, Julie Burton.
Senior advisor for this episode, and indeed this special periodic series, Rebecca Adamson, Cherokee Nation, founder of First Peoples Worldwide.
I'm Robin Morgan, your producer and host. Thank you for being with us. Join us again next time on Women's Media Center Live.